What's happening, everybody? On today's show, Alabama continues to deal with portal losses off their roster, but they do add a few guys from over at Washington. Ohio State continues to poach from the SEC, and Auburn targets a familiar SEC name for their next DC. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, we got plenty to jump into, so let's dive into it. And my goodness, the news out of Alabama continues to churn. So we're going to start. Look, there's been a lot of disappointing stuff for Alabama. We're going to start with the good with Alabama today. So let's start with the good. Alabama coach Kalen Deboer bringing in some familiar faces from Washington. Germie Bernard, a wide receiver from Washington, is reportedly coming to Alabama. He'll be making his second transfer, started his career at Michigan State, played wide receiver at Washington last year, contributed on special teams as a return man, and he will be following Kalen Deboer down to Alabama. Played in 12 games for Michigan State 2 years ago, and then decided to sign with Washington as a transfer last year. Played in 14 games, made 7 starts, and finished 5th on the team with 34 catches for over 400 yards. Did add about 10 kick returns for over 200 yards. Also had a couple of punt returns as well. So, look, he stays in the same system. Offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb is coming over from Washington, as well as wide receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard. So, some familiar names there for the wide receiver Germie Bernard. Now, that's Jeremy with a G. But looking at some of his games last year, he had a very productive game in the Sugar Bowl against Texas. He did score a touchdown in the Pac-12 title game against Oregon. So a seasoned vet in Kalen Deboer and Ryan Grubb's system. So look, the way that Alabama's been losing guys the last couple weeks, they need to add some as much experienced guys as they can. Now, other news coming out that Alabama picked up an offensive lineman from Washington, their former center, Parker Brailsford, reuniting with Kalen Deboer and company. He was a freshman All-American in 2023, started all 15 games for the Huskies, made 13 total starts at center, and, some Alabama fans saying this is an upgrade over Seth McLaughlin. I mean, after all the, botched snaps in the playoff game against Michigan, they're hoping Brailsford can give them an upgrade there at center. So he joins the Tide, and like we said, one of the best interior offensive linemen in the country last year, freshman All-America honors. So, and part of that Joe Moore Award-winning best offensive line last year at Washington. So, kudos to him for joining the Tide. Now, they did also add a quarterback last week in Austin Mack. He was a recruit at Washington. He's going to follow Kalen Deboer and Ryan Grubb down to Bama. And Brock Hewart was on the next round with those guys talking about Austin Mack. And Brock Hewart described him, said, as big as a quarterback as I've ever come across. Certainly at his age and stage, I don't think people understand. He is 6'6", 240 pounds, with size 17 feet, Brock Hewart noted. He said, I think behind the scenes people don't realize that Dylan Morris had a bit of an injury, and Austin took second-team reps for the majority of the second half of last season. And if something had significantly happened to Michael Penix, 17-year-old was going to be the quarterback for this undefeated Washington team last year. Hewart also said that he does think that Bama got a really good quarterback in Austin Mack. So they add Austin Mack. They do lose a current quarterback recruit. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But Brock Hewart did say, I promise you, when you see this guy throw, when you see Austin Mack in person, His presence is enormous. He's bright. He's smart. The Husky staff loved him. I was bummed than any other player from the Huskies that went into the portal. So we will see what he does there in Tuscaloosa. Now, let's talk about the losses that Alabama had in the last handful of days. Caleb Downs, we knew, had entered the portal. There was a lot of buzz that he could be going to Georgia. But over the weekend, it was revealed Caleb Downs going to Ohio State. He will go play for Ryan Day's program over there at Ohio State, but a stud freshman for Alabama this past season. Downs played all 14 games as a freshman, led the Tide with 107 tackles, and 3.5 tackles for a loss, 2 interceptions, 4 pass breakups, a forced fumble. Big time loss there for Kalen Deboer and that Bama staff. And look, future NFL safety. We'll see what he does next year for Ohio State. Another one, former Alabama defensive back Trey Amos. He is leaving, but he's staying in the SEC. Reports are he is headed to Ole Miss to go play for Lane Kiffin. Started in the Sun Belt, where he played for Louisiana for 3 seasons and spent 1 season last year with the Crimson Tide, and played well in the snaps that he got. Trey Amos over there at Alabama he has 18 career pass breakups. Finished tied for 3rd on Alabama last year with 5 pass breakups. He'll join Pete Golding's defensive staff over there at Ole Miss. So never played for Pete Golding, but he will now. Trey Amos, 9th avail 24/7 Sports rated him the 9th best cornerback in the portal, and he's heading to Ole Miss. The other big one, Alabama left tackle Kadyn Proctor, the big 5-star offensive tackle from last year's recruiting class. He had entered the portal. He is going back home to Des Moines, Iowa. Signed with Alabama as a high school recruit. Spent nearly 6 months as an Iowa commit and then flipped to Alabama. But on Saturday, he announced he's going home to play for the Iowa Hawkeyes. 6'7", 360 pounds. Kadyn Proctor leaving Alabama, going to Iowa. Now, Proctor did earn that starting left tackle job in fall camp last year and held it down throughout the season. Was an all-SEC freshman selection. Did have some growing pains. Alabama's offensive line was inconsistent last year, but big-time talent going out there to Iowa. Best of luck to Kadyn Proctor. A few other notes here. Kalen Deboer was on the Paul Feinbaum show on Friday and talked about some of the roster attrition that they are going through. On the Paul Feinbaum show, Deboer said he was, quote, not alarmed at all by the portal movement. He said, you just stay the course, you roll up your sleeves. There's such a great group of leaders here, this program, who want to uphold the standard of Alabama football, and they are sticking together. We want those guys who want to be here. So, again, Kalen Deboer not hitting the panic button. They did lose Alabama defensive back Jameer Grimsley. He signed with this current recruiting class, but he entered the portal having never played a down for Alabama, and he announced he is transferring to Florida. On Sunday, he announced it. He had to enter the portal to change teams following Nick Saban's retirement, but the 6'3", 185-pound corner, he has 4 stars, number 17 corner in this class. He's going to go play for the Florida Gators, committed to Alabama back in July. So best of luck to him. And then lastly, former Alabama quarterback Julian Sayin. He was also part of this class of 2024. Had signed with the Tide, was committed to them for a while. He is transferring to Ohio State. That coming from Pete Thamel. So it was the number 1 quarterback prospect in the 2024 recruiting class. 5-star quarterback, number 5 overall player in this class. And like we said, they will have Jalen Milroe back. Ty Simpson is sticking around. And they will also have Austin Mack coming in from Washington. So, Austin Mack not as highly touted as a recruit as Julian Sayin, but it's a trade-off there for the Tide. And one more quick note here as we throw it over to Georgia. Travaris Robinson, T-Rob, of course, was at Alabama last year as their defensive backs coach, good recruiter. He's going over to Georgia, and details coming out on his contract. He is set to make apparently $1.3 million for next season, according to documents that were obtained by Dog Nation. He agreed to join Georgia's staff as co-defensive coordinator as well. Muschamp will slide back over into an analyst role. But last season, Georgia's highest-paid offensive assistant was Mike Bobo, who made just over $1 million. So T-Rob obviously going to be one of Georgia's highest-paid assistants. Glenn Schumann, the co-DC, reportedly made $1.9 million last year. So Schumann and Travaris Robinson making a good bit of money there to run that defense over there for Georgia. Of course, probably no love lost when Georgia takes on Alabama next season. Going to be a good one. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Coming up next, we still got more tidbits. We're going to go around the conference and continue to get you guys all caught up. That is coming your way here in just a sec. First, I want to remind you this episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs continue churning on. We're down to the Final Four, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That is $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Their app is super easy to use. So many different ways to get in on the action. But first thing you want to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is going to get you in on the special promotion that we got as partners of Locked On. And go make your first bet a layup. Get signed up, and then go download the app. And you can check the FanDuel app each and every day and see all the action they got up there. SEC basketball, SEC futures on football bets, whatever you want to get in on, they got it there for you. It is FanDuel. They are the official partner of the NFL. All right, run along here, Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Keep coming back tomorrow on the show. Continue to catch you up on all the great action going on around the conference. I mean, so much news, it's crazy. Just coming out of the weekend, we have so much, literally spent almost the entire first segment just on Alabama news because, well, as we know, they were late to the game, late to the party with Nick Saban retiring and having the whole roster churn and guys coming and going. So it is nonstop over there. It's nonstop going around the conference. So we got plenty more to get into. So let's do it. Let's jump into it. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Intercepted. Makes the handoff. Throws. What a catch.
Around the conference.
And we jump over to Ole Miss. As we already told you, Trey Amos from Alabama is transferring over to play for the Rebels. But the Rebels also bringing in another former SEC player from Tennessee, defensive back Brandon Turnage, announced Friday evening he is going to transfer to Ole Miss. Started his college career at Alabama, spent the past 3 seasons in Knoxville. Initially signed with Alabama as a 4-star recruit back in 2019. And Brandon Turnage now reunited with Pete Golding, who was on that Alabama staff when he first committed to the Tide, but was the number 103 overall player back in that class, the number 11 corner in the country. He's a Mississippi native, went to high school in Oxford, so gets to come back closer to home. And Ole Miss just continues to add through that portal. It's so crazy. They have had a couple of guys, though, that had agreed to come to Ole Miss and then flipped and went to other schools, particularly several to Louisville. So kind of weird there, but we'll keep an eye on that. And who knows, maybe Brandon Turnage will flip his Ole Miss commitment, go to Louisville. But Turnage will have 1 season of eligibility remaining there in Oxford. Over at Tennessee, they made a couple of pickups over the weekend, including offensive lineman from LSU, offensive tackle Lance Hurd. He was a 5-star prospect in last year's recruiting class. Oklahoma was making a push for him. We had heard rumblings that he was going to go to Tennessee, and now it's a lock. He is going to Tennessee via the portal. He was ranked the number 3 offensive tackle last year, the number 15 overall prospect in the class of 2023. He's 6'6", 340 pounds. Played in several games in his freshman year at LSU, did earn 1 start. So we'll see. Should be an immediate impact player there for the Tennessee offensive line. Lance Hurd going to Knoxville. Also, the Vols picking up a defensive lineman through the portal from Stanford, former defensive lineman Jackson Moy. He is Tennessee's second transfer of Sunday. His best season came back in 2022 as a freshman at Stanford. He had 4.5 tackles for a loss and half a sack. Played in 12 games for Stanford last year, but numbers just weren't as productive. But Tennessee now has 8 transfer commitments in this group. Moy was initially a 3-star recruit back in the class of 2022. They'll have 2 seasons of eligibility remaining there in Knoxville. One other Tennessee note, Brew McCoy, the wide receiver, looking forward to come back from a tough injury that cost him much of last season. Through the first 4 games of this past year, he was starting to look pretty good. In the second quarter of their win over South Carolina, he suffered a season-ending fracture dislocation of his right ankle. In a radio interview in Knoxville the other day, Brew McCoy said he had 4 surgeries, about 10 days in the hospital. He said, "Here I am now, 6'3", 220 pounds, looking to get back on the field and be one of those big-time playmakers for Nico Iamaleava." And Brew McCoy said, "Rehab's gone great, no setbacks, out of the boot. I wear shoes every day. I walk around normal. I can lift like a normal guy. Now I'm taking the step into becoming Brew McCoy, the football player. And my goal is to take this time that I have in rehab and make myself. I don't want to come back and be less of who I was before." In his years there at Tennessee, McCoy has 69 catches for 884 yards and 5 touchdowns. Over at Auburn, they need to fill the shoes of Ron Roberts. They need a new defensive coordinator. And according to Matt Zenitz at 24/7 Sports, Auburn is targeting DJ Durkin. Of course, Durkin has been the SEC as a DC for the last 4 years, was at Ole Miss in 2020 and 2021, and then the past 2 seasons been the DC at Texas A&M. So Durkin would replace Ron Roberts, who went over to Florida just a week ago to go be their, well, what is it, like co-something or other. He's helping run the defense there with Austin Armstrong and the Florida Gators. But DJ Durkin, like we said, a lot of experience. His defense was pretty good last year. Aggies ranked 5th in the SEC in yards per play, and they were good at stopping the run. They were very active on that defensive line. So we'll see if DJ Durkin is the guy for Auburn, and certainly a big year for Hugh Freeze as he heads into year 2 on the Plains, trying to bounce back from a 6-7 season in year 1. But defense wasn't really the problem last year at Auburn. It was the offense and quarterback play that kind of hampered them. So that's on Hugh Freeze to get fixed, and Derek Nix. But DJ Durkin, look, there's some things in the past with Durkin, and you can Google him. I've seen some people say, "Oh, this would be a terrible hire." As a defensive coach, he's a good defensive coach. So if you focus on that, that would, in my assumption, be a good hire for Auburn. Over at South Carolina, special teams coordinator and associate head coach Pete Lembo is expected to leave. According to Pete Thamel of ESPN, sounds like he will take the Buffalo head coaching job. He led Lembo has previous experience as a head coach of the Mack. He led Ball State's program for 5 years. He's been on Shane Beamer's staff at South Carolina from the get-go, was hired ahead of the 2021 season. South Carolina has consistently had strong special teams units. Of course, Beamer ball runs in the family, but losing Pete Lembo, Shane Beamer tweeted out, "Congrats, Pistol Pete. Incredible opportunity for you. You made our program better on and off the field. This position in Columbia is extremely attractive to so many now because of it. Although the new coach will never be able to reach your level of nickname usage on our team." So having some fun there with Pete Lembo, but congrats to him moving on to Buffalo, and now Shane Beamer's got to hire a new special teams coach. Does have a big piece on his coaching staff. Markel Blackwell, contract details coming out on his deal with South Carolina. He will be the Gamecocks running backs coach after he spent last season at Texas A&M. The 2022 season, he was at Ole Miss, and the previous 3 seasons at Houston. But Blackwell will get a 2-year deal worth $400,000 in his first year and over $500,000 in his second year. He replaces Montario Hardesty, who was South Carolina's running backs coach previously. But at Ole Miss, he coached a Rebel unit which ranked 3rd in the country and led the SEC at 256 yards per game. Of course, Quinshon Judkins led the SEC in rushing that year. So see if he can get this ground game going for Shane Beamer and company. The rushing game was rough last year at South Carolina. Over at Texas A&M, Mike Elko adding to his staff. He is adding San Diego State safeties coach Kyle Hoke to his staff as a defensive analyst. Kyle is the nephew of former Michigan head coach Brady Hoke, course, you're probably familiar with that name, but Elko rounding out his staff when he replaced Jimbo Fisher and looking to hit the ground running there at Texas A&M, hitting up the transfer portal currently with the, or as of Friday, had the #1 transfer portal class in the country, so the Aggies doing some work there. Lastly, over at Florida, their football program under NCAA investigation, and it's coming out that corner report is due to potential violations committed during the Jaden Rashada recruitment. That's from ESPN's Mark Schleybaugh, saying that Rashada was previously committed to Florida after agreeing to an NIL deal with the Gator Collective that would reportedly be worth $13 million over 4 years. Rashada signed with the Gators December 2022, but requested a release from his letter of intent. Later enrolled at Arizona State, played for the Sun Devils this past year. But per the report, Rashada asked for his release from Florida after the Gator Collective was not able to uphold the terms of their NIL deal. The collective, which was not officially affiliated with the school, has since been shut down, but news of the investigation first reported by the Tampa Bay Times on Friday afternoon. Florida says they are cooperating with the investigation, so we'll see if anything comes from that. But, yeah, the NIL stuff, the NCAA trying to crack down on this and giving Florida State some punishments last week. It's, look, NCAA, I think a lot of people agree, stay out of some of this stuff. Like, we're getting closer and closer to, I think, the SEC and some other conferences telling the NCAA to, hey, stick it. We're moving on. We're going to go operate under our own jurisdiction because NCAA, what good do they do? It seems like they always just bring just turmoil and unhappiness to a lot of different schools. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, let's jump back into it because we got a couple of recruiting tidbits before we get out of here. And let's dive into it as we focus on DeAndre Robinson, a kid who had, about 60 offers on Friday, decided to announce his plans to play in the SEC coming up this season. Robinson is from the state of Florida. He's a 4-star recruit, ranked the number 34 defensive lineman in the class of 2024. And according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, the number 34 player from the state of Florida, like we said, 6'5", 315 pounds. He flips from Texas to go to Florida. So big time get there for Billy Napier and the Gators. DeAndre Robinson. Gerald Chapman recently joined Florida staff from Colorado. Austin Armstrong was listed as his recruiter along with Chapman. So brings Florida's class to 19 members of their class of 2024. So a good pickup there for Napier. Over at Mississippi State, Jeff Lebby adding to his, and now DeAndre was the 2024 class. This is looking ahead to 2025. Mississippi State adding to their 2025 class, Jeremiah McLeod, 6'4", 285-pound prospect from the state of Florida, listed as an athlete by Rivals, but as an edge prospect, according to 24/7 Sports. He is currently unrated by the main recruiting services, but he's the third pledge for the class of 2025 for Jeff Lebby. He's the first 2025 prospect to commit since Jeff Lebby was hired. They also have 3-star linebacker A.J. Rice and 3-star athlete Kamario Taylor in that group. And over at Texas, they beat out some SEC competition to get an in-state defensive lineman. Lance Jackson from Texarkana announced his pledge for the Longhorns. He is 6'5", 245 pounds, rated a 4-star, the number 9 defensive lineman, the number 18 player in the state of Texas, and the number 105 prospect overall for the class of 2025. He had offers from the likes of Alabama, Auburn, Arkansas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, a lot of folks on that list. But congrats to the Longhorns picking up Lance Jackson. And over at Georgia, they got a decommitment. Bulldogs lost a commitment from 4-star corner Tay Harris out of the class of 2025. He had committed last summer to Georgia, but number 221 overall player, the number 27 corner in the country in that cycle. So that brings Georgia now down to 6 commits in the class of 2025. That ranks number 6th nationally. And a quick SEC hoops nugget. College game day. Going to travel to Fayetteville next Saturday for the SEC matchup between Kentucky and Arkansas at Bud Walton Arena. Arkansas hosts South Carolina, or rather hosts Kentucky this coming Saturday, and going to be a big one there. As man, it's been a fun season so far in SEC hoops. I know we're only a couple weeks in here, but we watched as Alabama took their first SEC loss over the weekend, losing against Tennessee. And we've got Auburn continue to be undefeated in the conference. They're now the lone undefeated team in the SEC, but it's been a fun dogfight to watch some of the teams and how they've been battling out so far. Auburn sitting atop the SEC at 5-0, Tennessee at 4-1, Kentucky 4-1, Bama at 4-1, and there's a big logjam of a bunch of 3s and 2s and 2s and 3s. Georgia, South Carolina, and LSU all 3-2. And then you got Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Florida, and Texas A&M at 2-3. Arkansas is at 1-4, kind of surprising a lot of folks. Coach Muss needs to get things turned around there. And then, of course, Missouri and Vanderbilt both at 0-5 in the conference. But Kentucky, obviously, they've looked really good. Antonio Reeves leading 5 Kentucky scorers in double digits so far this season. So looking forward to seeing that. Again, Kentucky and Arkansas Saturday, college game day there from Bud Walton Arena. And there you have it. You guys are all caught up on everything SEC. Look, there's going to be more transfer portal stuff. I'm sure Bama will probably have another decommitment or two. That's just what's happening here with the latest news going on around the conference. But thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Get all the top sports stories of the day with our local experts on Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So for your second listen, go check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We will talk to you guys tomorrow.